Hi, I'm Mayor Jay Tibshraeny, and welcome to this edition of Chandler Inside Now. Today, it's my pleasure to have in studio Congresswoman Krysten Sinema. Kyrsten, thanks for coming to Chandler today.
It's great to be here with you, Mayor.
I thought before we got into some of your congressional duties and committees and bills and things like that, maybe a little bit about your background. You kind of had an interesting early life.
Yeah,
So let's talk about your early years.
sure. Well, my story is very unusual for a member of Congress. I was actually born and raised in Tucson, Arizona. Um, I'm one of a handful of natives to the state. I'm really grateful for that. But when I was little, my parents got divorced, like a lot of parents did
Hmm.
during the time. And after my dad moved out, my mom really struggled. So she was left home with three kids. And of course, we were really good kids, but still,
Right.
being a single mom with three kids is tough. And we hit really tough times. So we went from being a middle class family to being pretty poor. And so for a couple of years in my childhood, we actually were homeless.
Wow.
So we lived in this abandoned gas station without running water and without electricity. And, a lot of people are really surprised when they hear that story because they think, but this is America. The truth is, there are lots of kids and families who struggle through times of poverty here in Arizona and around the country. So those were really tough times for our
Yeah.
family. I was really lucky, though, Jay. We had help from my mom's church. We had help from family and friends. And, we had some help from the government. We were,
Right.
lucky enough to get food stamps for a while when I was older and it was time to go to school. I got a Pell Grant. I'm sure many of our viewers know. Pell Grants are an amazing thing. Pell Grants help low-income kids get a fair shot to go to college, and it helps pay for your tuition or your books if your family doesn't have enough money to pay. So I was really lucky to get a Pell Grant to college. But for all the kids who are watching, I also worked really hard. So I got an
Right.
academic scholarship and was the valedictorian of my high school. So I worked really hard to earn that help and got to college. After college, I moved out here to the Phoenix area.
Which
Been
high
here ever
school did you
since.
go to?
So actually, I went to high school in a small town in Northwest Florida
Okay.
because after my parents got divorced, I bounced back and forth between Northwest Florida, which is where my stepdad is from,
Right.
and Tucson, which is where my mom and dad are from. Well, actually, my dad was born in Phoenix. My mom was born in Tucson. They met when my dad was going to school at the U of A.
Ah,
So I went to Harrelson Elementary School. And if I had been able to stay in Tucson and go to school my whole career, I would have been at Cross Junior High and would have been in the CDO district in
wow.
Tucson. Yeah,
Awesome. And you went to ASU?
I did. I went to ASU a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I'm a Sun Devil through and through. I was really lucky that I got my master's degree at ASU in social work. So, before we met, Jay, I was a social worker in the Washington Elementary School District, which is at the very other end of this congressional district. So we're kind of at the southern tip of the Congressional District 9. And I worked up in Sunny Slope, which is in north central
Right.
Phoenix. It's at the very northern tip. And I was a social worker there for almost a decade before I went to the legislature. And I got my master's degree at ASU. And I just loved ASU so much, I kept going back.
Yes.
Got a couple more
Back
degrees
and
and
back and
back and
back.
back. And I still teach there.
Wow.
I teach on the weekends, actually, in the School of Social Work. And, Dr. Crow is so kind to let me do what I love best, which is to keep teaching.
You have an interesting background. It's helped frame your life, and it's obviously helped frame how you serve the public. You and I worked together at the
Yeah,
legislature. I was in the Senate. You were in the House. We crossed paths a few times in a good way.
yeah,
You were very bipartisan in nature,
that's right.
as am I and was I at the time. Um, how did that work for you with your caucus being bipartisan? Sometimes with me, it wasn't the most friendly atmosphere, but it was the right thing, and I
It
thought
was
we got a
always the
lot
right thing
done.
to do. Yeah. And Jay, when you were in the Senate, while there were times when you split with your caucus on issues to cross the aisle, the work that came out of that was always bipartisan in the end. And it
Hmm.
was supported by the governor, regardless of whether the governor was a Republican or a Democrat. And I think that's really important because it shows that you're putting your constituents first. And my goal when I was in the state house and later in the state Senate and now in Congress is to do what's right for the community, not really to worry about Republican or Democrat
Hmm.
or whether or not people in your caucus like it. For viewers, they don't even know what a caucus means. But basically, what it means is once a week, all the Republicans will meet together in a room, and once a week, all the Democrats will meet together in a room, and they kind of plot out and plan what they want to do next. And I think that's smart because you want to find areas of
Hmm.
interest for people who have shared values. But I also think it's important to spend just as much time with your colleagues across the aisle to make sure that those areas of shared value and interest cross those party lines, because the constituents that we serve, they don't get up in the morning and think, oh, I've got to make this Republican cereal for my kids, or
Right.
I got to put some Democratic gas in the car to get to work. They just think about taking care of their families.
Right.
And the work that you did when you were in the state legislature, the work that I did when I was there, the work you're certainly doing now as mayor, and the work that I'm honored to be able to do in Congress is that same work. It's not partisan work. It's just taking care of people, helping businesses. And so when there are folks in my party who maybe aren't super happy with my work across the aisle, I just remind them that we're doing it for our constituents. And our constituents are Republicans, Democrats, and independents.
You're right. We don't ask them when they call and need some assistance
That's
or
right.
input or want to just talk. We don't ask them what party they are.
No,
We serve.
that's right.
We serve the public.
Well, and it's funny because the only place when people do ask your party is when you're in one of these political bodies. But like if you take your kids to go see a ball game during spring
Hmm.
training, and you meet a couple or a family next to you, you don't ask them about their political
No.
party. You ask them about what grade their kids are in and what they do for a living. And that's the kind of work that I think we need more of in government is public servants who are interested in taking care of families and businesses, not because of any kind of partisanship, but because you want to help your country and your state and your community get stronger.
And you have a unique attitude, being bipartisan, wanting to get things done versus gridlock. How's that working in Congress? Because I know it was a little political at the state
Yeah.
for all of us, but compared to Congress, it's a different ballgame. Congress is fairly gridlocked at times, maybe more so than others. But your attitude is more of a let's work together. How's that working for you? Because those are two conflicting
Yeah.
attitudes.
It's actually been really great for me in Congress because when you have 435 members, you're going to have a big number of people who want to work together. And right now in Congress, that number is growing. When I first got there, I was a little disappointed
Mhm.
that it seemed to be a pretty small group of people who wanted to work across the aisle and get things done. But again, we came from serving in a body of 60 people and 30 people, and to go to 435 is a whole
Yeah.
different ballgame. But the good news is there are always people who are willing to work together. So actually, when I first got to Congress, even before I was sworn in, we started a new freshman caucus called the United Solutions Caucus.
Mhm.
20 Democrats, 20 Republicans. We started meeting biweekly. We still meet now. And our goal was to just tackle the real simple issues: balancing the budget, reducing the deficit, and bringing down our debt. Those aren't really the simple issues.
No, I know.
We wanted to tackle the big issues in Congress, but we believe that you can get a bipartisan group to talk about how to balance the budget and reduce the deficit, be smart about our debt, and you can do it in a bipartisan way without name calling and without vilifying each other. And our group has been really instrumental in helping bring forth solutions to the compromises we have seen in Congress, both the bipartisan budgets that we've passed, as well as ending the shutdown back in 2013. Our group was really instrumental in helping bring that together.
Mhm.
There's another group I'm really excited to be a part of. It's a group called The Third Way, and
Okay.
we have been called incorrigible pragmatists. Isn't that a great name?
That's a good
I love it.
good label.
If someone wants to call me an incorrigible pragmatist, they are welcome to. We were also called radical centrists, which I thought was nice.
That's nice to know.
What we do in Third Way is bring Republicans and Democrats together to find shared solutions. We want to figure out how to create long-term security for Social Security, how to get our budget back on track, basically how to solve our country's greatest challenges and do it as a team, which is
Right.
what people do in their businesses and their home life.
Hmm. Yeah, good stuff.
It's good.
Before I totally leave the state, because we did work together, we both served with Gabby Giffords. Gabby
right.
was in the Senate
That's
when
right.
I was there. She sat right behind me my first 2 years.
That's right.
And you worked close with her.
I
And
did. She was a real mentor to me, and she still inspires me every day.
yeah, me too. How's she doing?
She's doing really well.
Good.
Now, recently she did break her leg
Ooh.
because she was training for the Tour de Tucson, which is a 40-mile bike ride.
Yeah.
And she has a recumbent bicycle, which is a bicycle where you kind of lay back where you're seated, and then you use partly your legs, but also your hands.
Okay.
And she was training for the tour and unfortunately had a bike accident and broke her leg.
Wow.
But a broken leg is nothing to Gabby Giffords, right? She's endured so much more. But I got to tell you, it's incredible every time I see Gabby. She is whip smart, as she has always been. You remember that.
Yes.
You could never get anything past Gabby Giffords. And that sense of humor and that wit is still every bit of who Gabby Giffords is. But recently, you can tell that she's really put a lot of work into her rehabilitation because her skill set in terms of communicating is just grown tremendously. And you can carry on this wonderful conversation with the Gabby that we have known and loved for many years. So
Yeah.
she's doing really well.
She's a beautiful person. I
She
enjoyed
really is.
working with her, and I've kind of followed her recovery, and I'm glad to see all the good positive accolades she gets, because she certainly deserves
She
them.
deserves them. You know, her birthday's coming up.
We'll have to wish her happy
Yeah,
birthday.
we will.
But she was fun. She was very constituent oriented when we were down
right.
at the Senate. We served on the government committee my first 2 years together. I chaired it, and she always had a lot of bills, and I always got her bills on the agenda, because she was always saying, "I'm bringing a bunch of people down from Tucson, Jay, so you're going to hear it." I said, "Well, I'm going to hear your bill."
Oh, I tell you, her bills were the kind of bills you want to see in government. They were common sense, practical, not ideological. And, you know, one of the things that I learned from Gabby when she went to the Senate was, remember, my first year in the House. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember looking over at the Senate and watching her work and thinking, you know, if she can do something like this, then I can learn how to do this as well.
Yeah.
And she's really just been a trailblazer for women in the state and for young women in particular. And I just feel really honored and lucky that we got to serve with her.
Good. I am too. I feel real privileged to do that, and I like
Yeah.
to tell folks about that too. But thanks for that. So you're in Congress now. You're in your
Second term.
Second term. How's that going? What are the big issues this year? Probably the same issues that are big all the time, but what's the big issues going on?
Well, we have a lot of stuff going on right now. One thing I'm really proud of was a bipartisan bill that we passed earlier this year to fix the way that we compensate doctors who provide Medicare services. You know, for 17 years, Congress was kicking the can down the road on how to pay this bill, which basically means they were kind of faking it and just using deficit spending, which is where you
Right.
spend money you don't have.
Right.
Now, you know, at the state, we can't do that.
Nope.
But
Or the city. We
and
can't do
the
that.
city, that's right. But the government, I mean, they spend like drunken sailors.
Yeah.
So we finally came up with a fix to actually pay the bill. And I'm so proud of the fact that we did that in a bipartisan way. Jay, we had 338 members vote for that bill. And that's huge.
Mhm.
I mean, it was just a huge success. So I was really proud of that. A big thing we're working on right now is just trying to figure out how to create jobs and grow jobs. And then a big issue that's going to impact Chandler is the reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. The Export-Import Bank helps businesses, both large and small, grow their business so that they can export more goods to other countries. And this is really important here in Chandler because we're home to awesome companies like Intel and Garmin, some of the best tech companies. And right next door in Tempe, we've got Medtronic and other companies that create really important manufacturing goods that we ship to other countries. So the Export-Import Bank helps provide insurance so that when you're shipping goods that they're covered, so you don't endure big losses financially. And this bill comes up at the end of June.
Okay.
We've got to reauthorize the bank. And for some reason, it's become this partisan fight, which makes no sense. And so Matt Salmon and I are actually working together on this to get the bank reauthorized because we think it's so important for the Southeast region in the Valley because we're home to some of these great businesses that are doing this great export work.
You're right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Garmin, and you and I were both at a dedication for
Yeah.
Garmin. You knew more about the Garmin products than
I have
Garmin
all of
did.
them. I have all of the Garmin products.
Yeah.
So, you know, I do endurance sports. So I do long distance biking and I do triathlon and long distance running. So if Garmin makes a product, I own it. I
Yeah.
loved it. It was great.
Yeah, you were rattling those products off, and I said, this is better than a commercial.
I was totally geeking out. I was
Yeah.
like, who can I talk to about these awesome products?
Yeah, we're real happy. We have a lot of great companies in Chandler. Garmin's one of them.
Yeah.
Give me a second. I'm going to reintroduce the show. We'll be
Great.
right back to finish up here. I'm Mayor Jay Tibshraeny. You're watching Chandler Inside and Out today. Our guest is Congresswoman Krysten Sinema. Thanks again for being here.
Well, it's great to be with you. I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah. Hey, give us your district. What is the number of the district? I get confused because there's 10 of them now, I think.
There's 9 now.
9.
And
okay.
we're number 9, which is the best, of
Oh,
course.
9. And the boundaries?
So the boundaries are a little bit difficult. If you think of it, it's kind of like a backwards C with a little tail, and Chandler's the tail.
Okay.
So it starts up in Central and North Phoenix, so up in the Biltmore, Arcadia, Sunny Slope area, and then it comes down Central Avenue all the way across Central and East Phoenix. It wraps around to get a little tiny bit of Paradise Valley and Scottsdale, all of Tempe, all of Ahwatukee, a chunk of Chandler, and about half of Mesa.
Yeah.
People are surprised because they don't realize that so much of Mesa is in the district, but we actually go out really far east, and our district touches Matt Salmon's district, which is the 5th
Do
district.
you have Dobson Ranch then?
I do.
Okay.
And actually, Dobson Ranch is the area where I bought my very first condo
Oh,
after I graduated from college.
so you're
I
back
lived in
home.
Dobson Ranch. Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. That each district, congressional district, is approximately how many people?
Between 710 and 715,000
Okay.
people. So the districts are large, but Arizona has grown so rapidly in recent years that each time there's a census, which happens every 10 years, Arizona's been getting new congressional districts. And that's something that's really wonderful for our state because it means more representation in Washington.
Because we went to 9 from how many?
We had 8 before, and
So we
before
picked
that
up.
we had 6.
What do you think we'll do in 5 years when they do the news?
I think we're definitely going to gain another seat because we're
Yeah.
continuing to grow rapidly.
Right.
But I think, Jay, in order for us to continue to grow, there are a couple things we've got to do.
Okay.
You know, I feel like we've really got to double down on education. If we want a really first class workforce like we have in Chandler with great companies like Intel and Garmin and the list, GM, right? The new
Yes,
GM is
GM is
awesome.
awesome.
Great facility.
You were there too.
I was there, and it's a facility that's just wonderful. And they're hiring these great recruits.
Mhm.
A lot of them they're recruiting from ASU, but we don't have enough talent yet coming out of our colleges and universities doing these STEM jobs. So places like GM are actually recruiting from other states, Colorado and Texas, and those are fine states. But I want Arizona kids
Right.
working at these high tech, high
I'm
wage
with you.
jobs. So one of the things I'm really interested in is making sure that we're paying close attention to investing in education, particularly community college and university, so we can have this great talent and grow good jobs for the future.
That's a good point. And, you know, Dr. Crow's a friend of yours. He's a
Yeah.
friend of mine. We've partnered with him on a couple things here in Chandler. They have a campus, a small campus
That's
here.
right.
Also got tech shop here that ASU was very instrumental in working with us to get here. But yeah, we've got to invest in our education. I'm
Yeah.
glad to be reading that folks are thinking a little bit about that as we're taping, and maybe going to do things not only at the state level, but also
I hope
the
so.
federal level.
I think there are opportunities at both the state and the federal level. We know that there's a proposal to maybe utilize some more state trust funding. I think
Mhm.
that's a good start. You know, we need to see more about the details, but that could be useful. At the federal level, we need to reauthorize the ESEA, which is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And I believe that we need to give more control at the local level.
Yeah.
That it's good to have national standards so we know that our kids can stack up and compete against kids from other states. But the folks who know the best are state and local leaders. And those are the ones who are on the ground tailoring these educational priorities to meet the needs of our kids in our community. And that's something I'm going to work on in ESEA is making sure that Arizona gets to make decisions that are right for our kids.
Great. Wanted to talk a little bit about the Veterans Hospital, the
Yeah.
Veterans Administration. There was a big blow up last year. You were very vocal on that.
I'm still angry.
Yeah. Tell us where that's at,
Yeah.
because that has stayed in the news. It's been
Yeah.
very it's all about care for our veterans.
That's right. Well, you know, last year in April, news came forth by some brave whistleblowers that a number of veterans were just languishing on these wait lists, secret wait lists, waiting months and months, sometimes even years, to see a doctor for their ailments. And there are allegations that somewhere between 18 and 40 veterans may have died while waiting for care. And frankly, Jay, that's just un-American. I mean, it's just wrong. It's
It
just
is wrong.
absolutely wrong. The Veterans Affairs Department is supposed to put veterans first and create centers of excellence to take care of veterans and treat their wounds of war. But the Phoenix VA hasn't been able to do that. Now, since this news broke last year, it has stayed in the news for the whole year because they haven't fixed it. You know, we just saw a report that came out recently showing that while wait times have gotten better, there are still 6,000 veterans in Phoenix who have to wait more than 30 days to get a doctor's appointment. Now, you and I don't have to wait more than 30 days to get a doctor's
No.
appointment. Our viewers don't have to wait more than 30 days. Why should our country's heroes have to wait more than 30 days? So that's a real problem. And recently, a new report came out showing that there are other problems. Like, for instance, 95% of all stroke victims who are being treated by the local Phoenix VA aren't getting the post-stroke tests to find out what their level of impairment is, which means these stroke victims are going home without the follow-up care or information for their family and other treatment professionals knowing what their impairment is.
Right.
That's a real failure. That's a real failure for these veterans who are in such great need. So we've got a bipartisan group that's working really hard to fix this. Chairman Jeff Miller, who's a Republican from Florida, chairs the VA committee, and he and I have co-sponsored a bill together that gives the Veterans Administration the authority to fire bad actors faster.
Mhm.
You know this, and I think our viewers do too. There are two men who've been on administrative leave since May 1st of 2014, and they're still getting a paycheck. They
Hmm.
haven't been fired.
Wow.
They've earned over $250,000 in the last year sitting at home doing nothing. Meanwhile, how many surgeries could that have paid for? How many prosthetics could we have purchased for veterans, right? So the secretary of the VA tells us that it's too hard to fire people. And there's all this bureaucratic red tape and it's, you got due process and blah, blah, blah. So Jeff Miller and I said, well, we'll make it easier for you. So we've introduced legislation that gives the secretary the authority to fire bad actors quickly. Just take action. We've
Yes.
also introduced legislation to protect whistleblowers from retaliation because in Phoenix, they're getting retaliated against and they're very afraid. So that bill's moving forward, and that's
Good.
something I'm really proud of, that we want to give the secretary the tools to take action, and then it's his job to take action, and we expect accountability. We're just going to keep fighting on this until every veteran gets the care he or she needs.
It's kind of like turning the Titanic.
Yeah.
It's a
Oh,
major undertaking.
it's this huge
It's
ship.
culture.
That's exactly right. It's culture. So earlier this month, I actually put out a press release about some of these bad news stories that we had recently heard about, saying they need a major culture change. The culture has to be about veterans first. And unfortunately, the VA has been about putting the employees first. And that's just not right.
We're going to keep a close eye on that because that's
Yeah.
a subject that's near and dear to all of our hearts, and
That's
we
right.
want to keep fighting on that one. Want to get that fixed.
Well, Jay, it's my number one priority. And we actually have a veterans resource page on my congressional website, sinema.house.gov, with a veterans resource guide and up-to-date information on the fights we're in the middle of to try and protect veterans and solve this system. So I'd encourage folks who are watching, if there's a veteran in their life who's not getting the care that he or she deserves, they should contact our office because we'll go to bat for them.
Give us that website again.
It's Sinema, SINEMA house.gov. Or they can call our office at 602 956 2285.
We'll get that on the screen when
That'd
we
be
show
great.
this.
That'd be great. And our office is open 5 days a week. Our number one goal is to serve veterans and make sure they get the care that they deserve.
Good. Thank you for that. I
Absolutely.
appreciate that. So do they. So one of the committees you serve on is the Financial Services Committee.
Yeah.
What are some of the duties of that committee and the oversight you're involved with there?
So this is a really important committee because the Financial Services Committee manages all of the financial structures in our country. So banks, credit unions, insurance companies, asset managers, all of those kinds of companies. And a lot of people might think, gosh, that doesn't have a lot to do with my life. But really, it's every day of your life when you're engaging in these financial transactions. So our job on the committee is to make sure that we're protecting consumers, but also reducing regulatory burdens so that businesses can grow and do the work they need to do. One of the complaints I hear from businesses almost every day in Arizona is that they're just crushed under the burden of regulation. And so we're trying to streamline those regulations to make it easier for businesses to get ahead. And that's a big part of what we're doing in that committee. We're also working to make sure that middle class people who want to save for retirement or start an investment account for their children, that they can have the help and the tools that they need to do so without being afraid that they'll lose the money or not get the advice that they need. So it maybe doesn't sound super exciting, but it actually
Right.
matters a lot to people's bottom lines.
Finances are important.
That's right.
So how many committees do you serve on over there?
Actually, I just serve on the Financial Services
Okay,
Committee.
it's huge then.
It's a very big committee. That's right. There are 4 committees that are committees of primary jurisdiction, the 4 largest committees with big jurisdictions. And if you serve on those, you don't serve on a second committee.
Okay.
So I spend all of my time working on the Financial Services Committee. The other area that I spend a lot of time on, as we just talked about, is veterans work.
Mhm.
So even though I'm not on that committee, that's personal for me. I come from a family of folks who served in the military. My little brother's still active duty today. So that's just something I'm going to do because I care a lot about it.
Got a couple minutes left. What can the public expect over the next year out of Congress? Probably, I know we're already getting into some election cycles, but what can they expect from Congress? We had the last election cycle, the Republicans took the Senate, so now they control the Senate, the House, but not the executive branch. So there's a little bit of check and balance still there. What do you see over the next year in terms of the D's and the R's working together, or as we get into presidential politics, how's that going to affect things?
I actually feel like this year has been better in terms of bipartisanship than in the 2 years prior because there's this willingness to try and get things done. And what we've seen, the House didn't change much in the election, but the Senate did change control from one party to the other. But the Senate has these safeguards to make sure that the minority is never truly pushed to the corner. And so the minority has a lot of weight, but whichever party's in power, the other party has a lot of power in the Senate. And so what we've seen in the Senate is that moderate Democrats and pro-business moderate Republicans are actually working together. And we're seeing bipartisan solutions come out of Congress this year. Not on everything. There's still
Right.
gridlock on some stuff.
Yes. Right.
But, we got that doc fix bill done for Medicare. We've reauthorized for the short term the Highway Trust Fund, which matters a lot to Chandler. We need a long-term fix for the Highway Trust Fund. That's something we'll be dealing with this fall. That matters to growing cities like Chandler and the East Valley corridor, because that's how we get predictability for infrastructure and transportation building in the future. So we'll be working on that this year. The Export-Import Bank, which I mentioned is very important for business, we'll be doing that this year. And we've really got to figure out how to address this issue of the budget and how to bring our deficit down.
Yes.
The deficit curve has been coming down slightly over the last few years, but we're still at an unsustainable rate. And, Jay, when you and I are gone and your grandkids are, going to apply for their first job or buy their first home, they've got to have an economy that works for them. And if we're not being smart about our spending, we're not going to have an economy that works for them. So that's something that Congress has got to tackle. There's actually a bipartisan group called Fix the Debt Coalition. And Jeff Flake and I are both members of this coalition. Okay. And we're actually named Fiscal Heroes for our work because we're a group of folks, both Democrat and Republican, both the House and Senate, who really want to sit down and do the hard work of figuring out how do we solve this problem? How do we get ourselves on a sound financial track for the future? How do we make sure that Americans can have a better life for their kids than they have for themselves? How do we ensure that our government stays globally competitive and that we retain our global superpower ability to influence what's happening around the world? Right. We've got to do a lot of work in Washington to make sure that we regain that status because we're in danger of losing some of our ability to compete globally. We've got to get our fiscal house in order.
We'll watch that work. I'd like to go on, but we're out of time.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for coming out today, and we'll keep an eye on the work you're doing in the Congress. We appreciate your representation of my constituents or your constituents.
Well, I hope that they're enjoying it, and they can always call and ask for help anytime.
Good. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much.
I'm Mayor Jay Tibshraeny. You've been in studio today with Congresswoman Krysten Sinema and myself. Until we see you again, take care and be safe.
That was probably the easiest interview